you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. As I just laid out, we have another very serious incident on a major college campus that could have been avoided, that now has brought in legally a high-profile member of a major college athletics program. And I'm not comparing apples to apples. I'm not trying to drag one into the other. But obviously, the last 2-3 weeks, we spent a lot of time talking about Brandon Miller, what he is alleged to have been involved in the shooting on Alabama's campus. And on Wednesday, we got some details about something involving Jalen Carter, a star defensive player for the University of Georgia. So let's just get into all of it. Let's break it all down. Let me give you all the background, and then I'll share some thoughts. We'll just discuss it all like we always do on this show. Never avoid tough topics here on the Aaron Torres Pod. But this story, sadly, ironically, starts on the same night as that shooting on Alabama's campus that took the life of Jamia Harris. I remember talking about both of these stories together, two tragedies, one on the campus of the University of Alabama, which we have revisited over the last couple weeks. But this one was at Georgia. Georgia won its second straight national championship in football in early January, the day of their national championship parade. That night, there was a tragic incident after the championship celebration that took two lives of two people involved with Georgia football. One was a recruiting staffer named Chandler LaCroix. The other was an actual player named Devin Willick, who passed away again in mid-January thanks to a car crash in Athens or around the Athens area, again in mid-January, involving a recruiting staffer, Chandler LaCroix, and a player, Devin Willick. At that point, that was all we knew, and that was all we discussed, kind of in the same way that we kind of gave you the who, what, when, where, why of the Darius Miles situation and then didn't really talk about it. Well, it was the same situation with Georgia football. We had no new details. We weren't pointing fingers. We weren't doing this. We weren't doing that. It was just a sad, awful situation. Well, on Wednesday, we got some very important details, some very important updates on this crash that, again, took the lives of two people involved with Georgia football. None of them are good, and some of them involve Jalen Carter, Georgia's star defensive player. He was ironically in Indianapolis for the start of the NFL Combine. He has since decided to leave. He has been charged with 2 misdemeanor crimes in the state of Georgia. And as I'm recording, my understanding is he has returned to Georgia, where he will likely turn himself into authorities, maybe by the time that you listen to this. So what happened? What was Jalen Carter's involvement? Well, what we found out was that on the night of that tragic car accident, took 2 lives, ironically, kind of crazily, there were actually 2 survivors of that car crash, including an offensive lineman named Warren McClendon, who actually played in the Senior Bowl just a few weeks later. But I bring it up because what we find out is that according to a police report and also some great reporting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, essentially the car that Chandler LaCroix was driving was allegedly involved in basically a racing situation, a street racing, drag racing situation involved with a car that was driven by Jalen Carter. This is from the police report in terms of how the police are describing the incident. Reading it from the police report, to be clear, this is not my opinion. It's not my thoughts. This is what the police allege have happened. The investigation found that Chandler LaCroix, driver of the 2021 Ford Expedition, and Jalen Carter, driver of a 2021 Jeep Trackhawk, were operating their vehicles in a manner consistent with racing shortly after leaving the downtown Athens area at about 2:30 a.m. The evidence demonstrated that both vehicles switched between lanes, drove in the center turn lane, drove in opposite lanes of travel, overtook other motorists, and drove at high rates of speed in an apparent attempt to outdistance each other. That is from the police report. What we also found out, not surprisingly, Chandler LaCroix's car was driving upwards of 100 miles an hour around the time of the crash. We found out that Chandler LaCroix was drinking that night. A toxicology report revealed that her blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit at the time of the crash. And we also found out that, as that police report reflects, Jalen Carter was driving the other car and basically fled the scene when it happened. According to police, he was at the scene and then left. He returned about 2 hours later and gave two conflicting stories to police when he returned. The first one was that he was there. The first one was that he was not at the scene of the incident when it happened. Basically that he heard the crash from his apartment, that he decided to kind of just come out and see what happened. That was the first story that he told, but then he had later told police that he was in fact driving behind and beside the SUV driven by LaCroix. Police did say that he had no signs of intoxication. And as of right now, that's what we know. But what we also know, and this is important, is that with the incident, he has been charged with 2 misdemeanor crimes, reckless driving and racing, for which, again, he has returned to Georgia, where he will reportedly turn himself in to authorities. Couple thoughts here before I just open the vault and share some thoughts. One, again, we're not a crime podcast. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to sit here and talk about, is Jalen Carter going to go to jail? Is this, is that, is whatever. You can read police reports, police documents if you care. I'm not here to say what he did do. I'm not here to say what he didn't do. I'm not here to argue his innocence. I'm not here to argue his guilt. I am just repeating what the police said, and the lawyers in the court system will figure out what's next for him. My understanding is that the 2 misdemeanors face upwards of a year in jail. So that's obviously on the table potentially for this situation. And I also, before we kind of get into all the details, I do want to say, this was awful incident, which could have been much worse, which we're going to get to in a second. But there were 2 people who lost their lives on this night. Bad decision-making, but, rest in peace to Chandler LaCroix and Devin Willock, who are both obviously no longer with us. Now, in terms of my thoughts, let me just say this. And I want to preface it by saying what I always say in this situation. I am far from perfect. I have made many mistakes in my life. There are many days and many moments which I wish I could do over. I'm not perfect. I don't claim to be. But I have to say, this was so dumb and so idiotic by all parties involved, okay? We have a lot of young people that listen to this show, high school aged, college aged. I am grateful for every single person that listens to this show. Let me just say this. I'm a dude in my 30s. I've made a ton of mistakes that I regret. I can definitively tell you, though, I've never drag raced or street raced, and don't drive drunk. I've never driven drunk, and I've certainly never driven drunk while speed racing. And I bring it up not to get on some high horse, not to tell you how incredible I am, not to tell you I'm a perfect human being. I'm saying it to say, for the young people listening, there is nothing cool about street racing. There is nothing cool about getting hammered, and there is nothing cool about anything that Jalen Carter is alleged to have been involved in on the night of this incident. A night that cost 2 people their lives. And you know what I keep going back to? As awful as this is, as tragic as it is for Chandler LaCroix and Devin Willock, who are no longer with us, and certainly for their families, who I feel a ton of sympathy for. You know what I can't help but think? This could have been so much worse. Let me read again what the police alleged happened the night of the incident. The evidence demonstrated that both vehicles switched between lanes, drove in the center turn, drove in opposite lanes of travel, overtook other motorists, and drove at high rates of speed in an apparent attempt to outdistance each other, okay? I bring it up to say, it brings me back to some of the stuff that we've talked about with the Brandon Miller, Darius Miles alleged incident. I'm not comparing the two, but I sort of am in this case. And when I think about the Brandon Miller incident, I think about the fact that according to police reports in Tuscaloosa, 11 shots were fired that night. We lost Jamia Harris, but think about how much worse it could. It's awful that we lost a young woman who was a young mother. I am not trying to diminish that in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, what I would also say is that it could have been much worse. First of all, if you just read Brandon Miller's lawyer's own statement, Brandon Miller's lawyer alleges that he never got out of the car while this happened. There were 2 bullet holes in his windshield, which means that Brandon Miller is lucky to be alive. And anyone that was anywhere near the vicinity of that alleged shooting is lucky to be alive as well. Well, Jalen Carter, who, like Brandon Miller, has his whole life ahead of him, if you believe this police report, and I have no reason not to, he is lucky to be alive. Why are you street racing at 2 a.m. in the middle of a somewhat of a residential area? It's not cool. It's not funny. Jalen Carter is lucky that he is alive right now, this moment, to even walk into the combine where he had to walk out of on Wednesday. It could have been worse. He could not be with us here anymore. He could have hurt someone else, killed somebody else the way that he was driving. I feel terrible that there are 2 people that lost their lives, but this could have been worse. We could be talking about the loss of not only those 2, but the loss of the potential number 1 pick in the draft. We could be talking about the number 1 pick in the draft potentially. I don't even know what could have possibly been done. And I'm just here to tell you, there's young people, old people, whoever, people my age, I don't care. There's nothing cool. There's nothing funny about driving 104 miles an hour through a residential area. It's not cool. It's not funny. And it's not going to end well. I keep going back to this. Listen, I'm not perfect, but I think about what is the win for Jalen Carter? What is the win? What is the best case scenario in that incident? Best case scenario of driving 104 miles an hour through residential areas with other cars coming the other way. The best case scenario, you win a race, and then you go home and go to bed? No, don't do it. Don't be part of it. Jalen Carter, in mid-January, you're 2.5 months from changing your life forever. I don't know Jalen Carter's background. I don't claim to know his situation. I don't know if he comes from a lot of money, no money, whatever. What I do know is he is, in a couple weeks, in a couple months from this time of this incident, set to make money that will set him up for the rest of his life if he's smart with his money. Don't race. Don't whatever. Don't drive 100 whatever miles an hour reportedly in a residential area. I would hope if you see your friends getting behind a wheel drive after they've been drinking, you say no as it is, but this could have ended so much more poorly. So just from the baseline, forget that he's an NFL prospect. This could have ended so much more poorly for him, for the pedestrians of Athens, Georgia. It's just such a bad look overall. Now, in terms of the NFL draft stuff, like, we're a sports show. We have to talk about it. And I don't know how this can't affect the NFL draft. And I'm not trying to diminish the 2 people who lost their lives. I hope you understand, but this is a sports show. We got to talk about it. He went to the NFL Combine. It was interesting. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen multiple reports from multiple credible people talking about the dreaded character issues with Jalen Carter. Now, I don't know if it was solely to do with this incident, that maybe, because when you work in sports, sometimes you hear stuff behind the scenes that's coming out that hasn't come out yet. I don't know if all the draft analysts were talking about this, but how can it not affect draft stock? Again, not trying to diminish that 2 people lost their lives, but from the football perspective, can you take him top 5? I saw Sean Payton say this in an interview a few days ago. He goes, when you're drafting the top 5, when you're drafting the top 10, it shouldn't be a reach. It shouldn't be a player that's an inch too short or a step too slow or character issues off the field. You should be able to check every box. And so I don't know what that means for Jalen Carter. I know his insane talent, but this is now allegedly, reportedly on his resume. And you have to figure out, if I give this guy tens of millions of dollars with a rookie contract, is he going to show up to the facility on time? Is he going to be accountable? Or is he going to be out at 2:30 at night driving around like an idiot putting himself in danger, putting other lives in danger. We'll let the facts of the case play itself out, but this is not a good look. And from the football perspective, it will be fascinating to see what happens going forward. Finally, from the Georgia perspective, let me say this. To be clear, I want to make this obvious. I think this, to me, is obviously a different situation than Brandon Miller and Alabama as it is with Georgia, okay? And I saw Alabama fans getting in my mentions, Torres, you better have the same energy for Georgia that you did for Alabama. Well, this is obviously different because Jalen Carter is no longer under Kirby Smart's purview. Jalen Carter obviously declared for the draft. Jalen Carter is obviously not a Georgia Bulldog. First of all, Alabama fans, I guarantee you that if Jalen Carter was still a Georgia Bulldog and was playing week 1 next year, I guarantee you plenty of people would have had plenty to say and plenty of people would have criticized Kirby Smart in Georgia. So right now, Georgia is saying all the right things. Kirby Smart himself released a statement that said the charges announced today are deeply concerning, especially as we are struggling to cope with the devastating loss of 2 beloved members of our community. We will continue to cooperate fully with the authorities while supporting these families and assessing what we can learn from this horrible tragedy. The only last thing I would say, Georgia, this is a tragedy. I'm not trying to say that it's not. 2 young people lost their lives. Jalen Carter, we don't know what's going to happen. But if Georgia can learn any lesson at all from the Alabama situation, cooperate with police and make sure there's nothing else that you need to know. Last thing you want is to know that somebody else is somehow involved in this, and I'm not saying that they are. But Alabama fans are saying, Torres, why don't you talk about Georgia the same way that you're talking about us? Well, because Georgia's not playing this guy. Georgia's not playing this guy while he is part of an active police investigation, okay? But Georgia, do your homework. Make sure nobody else is involved. It's a tragedy. Do what you got to do. I don't even know what else to say. It's not the same as Brandon Miller. It's a tragedy nonetheless. I feel terrible for the 2 people who lost their lives. I hope, obviously, nothing else comes out about this night beyond the Jalen Carter stuff involving other players, involving this, involving that. It's just a tragedy all around. Obviously, we'll continue to cover this, by the way, as we get more details and, whatever happens with Jalen Carter happens with Jalen Carter.